Now that we have routing in place, let's take advantage of routing to add some additional features to the application. So I would like to give the user the ability to drill down and see the details of a movie, perhaps by adding a button here that when it's clicked, will load up a different view and view model pair to show everything that we know about a movie. Now in the sample application, really the only thing we know is the title and the year, but feel free to add your own data properties to a movie. Maybe you can add a collection of actors or an associated poster or picture for the movie. But before we can even build out the details view, we'll have to provide this link from the list view that is showing the movie information. So let me add another column to this table. This column will be like an action column. It's going to be full of buttons and different things that you can do to a movie. And I think I will build those buttons just as anchor tags that use Bootstrap to make the anchor tag look like a button. And this button will display the text details. And now ultimately what I need is a link that will send us to a route that we haven't defined yet. So first let's define the route that we want to use. Over in the application view model where we define routes, I'll add a new entry here. This route will be, if we go to details / and then some ID parameter, what I want the framework to do is go out and look for a module that is in that movie subfolder. We will call it details. That's a module we haven't implemented yet, but we'll get to that. For right now, I just want to get the link working. So let me save this file, come back to the list, and I could hardcode a URL inside of this page, but there is also a custom attribute that Aurelia provides. It's called route-href. And what route-href allows me to do is provide some information that the attribute can feed to the router to generate the URL that I need. So I can tell route-href that the route I want to go to is the details route. And because that route requires an ID parameter, I'm going to need to pass along some parameters using this syntax, params.bind. And it's a bit like building an object literal in JavaScript. I want to say that the parameters are an object that has an ID property, and that ID will have the value movie.id. So I'm relying on the fact that I am still inside of a repeat that's going over movies, and I have access to this parameter called movie inside of the repeat. I can use that to display the title and the release year, and also to pull out the ID of the movie and bind that into the parameters. Now, one quick note about the syntax. I know the team is working on improving this syntax so it's not so verbose. You'll just want to check the documentation to make sure you're using the appropriate syntax for route-href. But with this in place, I should now be able to move on and create that module, the details module. So let me add a JavaScript file, details.js, and I'll also go ahead and add the associated HTML file, the view, which will be details.html. And quite commonly, I start with the view so I can figure out exactly what it is that the view model needs to provide. And I'm thinking if I'm going to look at the details of a movie, it might be nice to have a header that can somehow show the title of a movie. And maybe I'll make it movie.title. So I will expect my view model to have a movie field, and that will be one of the movie objects that we've brought back from the web server. The other piece of information that we have available for a movie is the release date. So I can say released in movie.release year. And again, you can add other data and play around with other things like images and so forth. But the one other piece that I think I would want in this view is provide an explicit link that allows the user to go back to the full list. They can always use the back button, but not all users use the back button. So let me create another anchor tag that will be a button. And I can use the text back to list. And now let me show you another feature of route-href. I also have the ability to give friendly names to a route. So in this case, I'm going to say just route:*home. No parameters are needed. I just want to go to the home route. And in order for that to work, I'm going to have to go out and find some route that I want to call the home route. And it would make sense for the list route to be that. I'm just going to give this a name of home. That should give me the proper URL. And now, with the view in place, I will build out the details view model. In many ways, this view model will look a lot like the list view model, because I would expect to use movie data to access the movie that the user wants details about. So I'm going to import movie data from movie data, and I'll probably want to inject this into my class. So I will also import inject from Aurelia framework And now export a viewModel class, let's call it details. I will expect this class to have a constructor that will take the movie data component. Since I want it injected, I will use that inject attribute to provide the metadata about the type of component that I want injected, and then save off movie data into a field called data. Now when Aurelia loads up this viewModel, it will invoke an activate method if one is available. And it's really inside of activate where I want to do the work of going out and retrieving a movie. And I want it to look something like this.data.getById. So I want to get a movie by ID. And the first question is, what is the ID? Well, when Aurelia invokes the activate method, it will pass along an argument, we'll call it params. And for any parameters that you have defined in the URL in your routing configuration, those will be properties that are available on this params argument. So I should be able to say get by ID, params.id. And then, since that will be a promise, I would expect that to give me a movie. And what I'll do is just save that movie into a field of this class. This is very similar to what we did with the list view model that dealt with all movies. I also want to return that promise, or a promise that represents all of this work. Because what Aurelia will do, it is smart enough to see that when you return a promise from the activate method, it's going to wait for that promise to resolve before it actually puts this view into the DOM. So when the view enters the DOM, it should have all the data available. And if for some reason the promise is rejected, the router can cancel that navigation. This means we don't have views popping up without data. Instead, what we can do to let the user know that we're working on something is provide a little bit of animation. We'll get to that. But anytime you're working with some asynchronous activity inside of Activate, you typically want to return a promise to the framework that represents the result of that activity. So the framework can know when that activity is finished or if that activity has failed. And this is really all we'll need for the details view model. The last piece we need is currently our movie data component does not have a get by ID. I will need to add that. Oh, and while I'm inside of the view, I want all of my views to be inside of a Bootstrap container. So I'm just going to take the HTML that was there previously and push it inside of a div with a class of container, save this, and now movie data. We will add a method that allows someone to get by ID some movie. And if you are just using the static JSON file, what you might want to do is go out and get all the movies and then search for just the one that is indicated by the ID parameter. What I can do with my API is use the HTTP client to go out and get, and what I need to do is formulate a URL like /API/movies/ and then the ID. I can do that pretty easily with the ES6 string templates feature. So inside of backticks, I want to build a URL that will have base URL and then a slash and then the ID that we're looking for. And that will be a promise. I want to do some post-processing. So given a response, please return response.content. So I will use the shorter syntax for the arrow function that doesn't require the return keyword because there's no curly braces. And I want to make sure to return this promise. And now if I save everything, I hope I can come out to the application and refresh. And we'll be able to see our list of movies. I want to be able to click on one. And now I can see the details for Star Trek. So you might have seen a slight delay there, and that's because my API on the controller, when I go out to get a movie by ID, I have purposefully added a little bit of a delay here. So a 1000 millisecond delay. That's just going to allow us a chance to see that, first of all, the view didn't appear until the data is ready, and secondly, we're going to add some animation so that the user knows we're doing something when we're navigating to a new route.